Doja Dagaho. Thank you all for coming. Thank you Ashburton Museum. Thank you for shining a bright spotlight on the diverse histories of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Especially your recent exhibits and ongoing education programs to draw attention to the local Ng brothers heritage site. And now you have the incredible story of the SS Ventnor. I'm here to give you some context. New Zealand Chinese Association has just celebrated 90 years as a national organisation to provide unified representation to work for the interests and well-being of Chinese New Zealanders. And we do this by building trusted and active connections, ensuring our sense of belonging, and that we are proud of who we are. Now, being proud is from knowing and honouring our heritage, our history, and our ancestry. Back in the 1860s, the Chinese were actually originally invited to work in the gold mines in Otago, but they would find their conditions were far from inviting. However, they came to work to seek their fortune and were expected to return to China, but some would die before they did that. The SS Ventnor was commissioned to carry their remains back to China. It would be more than 100 years later, after it sank, that our community learnt that our ancestral remains were found and carried by local iwi, and thus began visits and building close relationships. We, the New Zealand Chinese Association, have been asked by the Ventnor descendants to lead our community work on the Ventnor history. So we now represent all the descendants of those lost on the Ventnor, all the respective descendant groups that originally organised or were part of the Ventnor shipment. Most importantly, we value the partnership with the iwi, who also care for the remains, the voices of the descendants themselves. The exhibit on display came about in 2021 when Bill Edwards from Heritage New Zealand asked if we would like to produce some posters for their annual stall at the Treaty Grounds on Waitangi Day. And the rest, as they say, is history. Now, thanks to Hannah, she is going to share her history. And I'd just like to note that Hannah's great-grandfather is James King, King brother number 5, and my father-in-law is Young King, King brother number 6. So welcome through many degrees and generations of connection, Hannah King.
I ngā mana, i ngā reo, e raurangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Auntie Lois, tēnā koe i tau mihi. Ki te honga mate, rātou te honga wairua, kua whe tūrangatia, e moi, kia au te moi. E mihi ana ki ngā mana whenua kaitahu. Tātou kua hui mai nei I raro I te kaupapa o te wā, tēnā tātou. Ko Waio, no Haino ki Tipuna, ko Winglung, ko Gi Chiangli, ko Ngāyu, ko Piangdi o ku Kāinga Tipuna. I whānau mai au ki o te tahi, engari e noho ana au ki Tāmaki Makaurau I nai anei. Ko Ng Jor Ching, rāua ko James King o ku Tipuna tāne. Ko King tōku ingoa whānau, ko Hannah tōku ingoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good afternoon everyone, taiga hou. My name is Hannah and it is a pleasure to be here with you all today on the opening weekend of the SS Ventnor exhibition. I've been invited to speak today as a member of the Ngwu whānau. We are descendants of Ng Jor Ching, whose remains were on the SS Ventnor. The story of the SS Ventnor is an important one in New Zealand's history, and the SS Ventnor and the connections made in recent years are a significant part of the ancestral landscape of the New Zealand Chinese community and my own family history here in Aotearoa. The story speaks to the cultural beliefs and sense of community among early Chinese immigrants to New Zealand, and it is also emblematic of the relations between Māori and Chinese kōiwi or non-Māori. And given the discourse around the Treaty of Waitangi at the moment, Te Tiriti, in recent months, now is a pivotal time I would suggest to reflect on this relationship. So today I'm going to split my talk into 4 parts. I'll talk a little bit first about my own family history and my connections to the SS Ventnor on mum's side and King brothers on dad's. Secondly, I want to talk about the history and the significance culturally of the SS Ventnor and its journey. Thirdly, I want to talk about the connections formed with iwi up in the Hokianga in recent years. And then lastly end on my reflections on what this means for the future. Before I get into it though, it is really important for me to acknowledge that I cannot and do not speak for all of the descendants, nor for all of the Ng Jor Ching descendants, nor for all Chinese New Zealanders, nor even for those of us of a certain generation. I expect my sentiments and experience are shared with many. But this is my personal kōrero. Of course, our history and our stories are a weaving together of many different perspectives, and I acknowledge the voices of those who have previously shared their own history and of those who are yet to speak. It's important also for me to say that I'm not an historian or a researcher or an expert on the SS Ventnor history. Some very knowledgeable experts have, of course, prepared the posters that some of you I know have already taken in downstairs, and I invite you to do so after as well. I want to acknowledge and thank those whose expertise, wisdom and hours of painstaking mahi and generous efforts with whakawhanaungatanga have gifted me with the knowledge that I share with you today. Including the many who have worked for and alongside the New Zealand Chinese Association SS Ventnor Committee, Heritage New Zealand Poheri Taonga, my late great uncle Gordon Wu, Lu Xiong Wong, Kirsten Wong, Murray Wu, Nigel Murphy, and there are many others who are too numerous to name. So to start off, to talk a little bit about my personal history. Both sides of my family descended from southern China. The families of my 4 grandparents came to New Zealand for various reasons during the 19th and 20th centuries. Some were very late to the party in the gold rush, didn't quite get there in time. Some were escaping the atrocities of World War II, and others left in the years immediately following World War II. But I guess why I'm here today is because of 2 of my grandfathers. One, my great-great-grandfather Ng Jor Ching, whose story tells of a period when Chinese migration to Aotearoa was in a transition period. New Zealand was seen, or had been seen, as merely a faraway land where one could come to work hard and then head back home to China. But that was slowly shifting. The other key person for today's purposes is my great-grandfather James King, brother 5. His story is set in a later period in the history of Chinese migration here, when New Zealand was a place to settle, a new place to call home. Now, because of these 2 grandfathers or great-grandfathers, some of my family like to say that I stand in the middle of a Venn diagram between 2 declared archaeological sites, one being the wreck of the SS Ventnor and the other the Ng brothers Chinese market garden settlement here in Ashburton. So a bit about James King first, as he is my link to Ashburton. James King arrived in New Zealand in January of 1920. He paid poll tax to secure entry at the port of Auckland. And then he went on to be one of the founders of the Ng brothers Chinese market garden settlement on Allens Road in 1921. King brothers, as I'm sure many of you knew, grew and supplied produce throughout the Canterbury region. It was the largest Chinese market garden in the South Island. But King Brothers was more than that. It was a thriving community of Chinese settlers, and it was the landing place and gateway to a new life in New Zealand for many of the men whose families would join them to settle here permanently in later years. It was wonderful to be here to see that site being declared as New Zealand's 8th archaeological site back in 2019, and for the opening of the site as a community heritage park just last year. Now, my granddad, James's son, Harry King, spent the years of his youth living and working at King Brothers. Harry King then bought the Snowdrop ice cream factory down on East Street in 1960, and for the next 35 years or so, Snowdrop was the go-to, I think, for locals and travellers alike for ice cream, fish and chips and Chinese takeaways. My dad grew up here in Ashburton, and he is an Ashburton College old boy. And as I said earlier, I was born in Christchurch, but I spent a lot of time down here in Ashburton throughout my childhood. Far too many rides on that old walnut flying fox in the Domain, and far too many lollybags from the Allenton Dairy on Harrison Street. My mother's side of the family, though, they mainly come from Wellington. They're based there. And it's through that side of the family, the Ng family specifically, that I'm descended from Ng Jor Ching. Ng Jor Ching was my great-great-grandfather, and he was the first of the Ng family to come over from China. He came to Aotearoa in the late 1880s or early 1890s, and he worked as a shopkeeper in Wellington. He died of tuberculosis in 1898 at the age of just 35. And he was buried in a Chinese section of Kōrero Cemetery in Wellington. His remains were then disinterred to be put on the SS Ventnor in the hope that he could be reburied in his homeland. As it happens, that wasn't to be, and I will talk more about that later. I've not known about Ng Jor Ching my whole life. The whole story only came to us quite a bit later. The odd family here and there knew that his remains were on the Ventnor ship, but it wasn't widely known. Most of us just thought that he had been lost at sea. What's extraordinary, though, is that I distinctly recall that on my very first visit to the Hokianga back in 2016, I walked the signal station track, as many do. That track leads to the edge of Aotearoa, or the south head of the Hokianga headlands. And I remember standing at the viewpoint there, perfect timing, this is the image here. And I remember looking out past the heads to the horizon and feeling really connected to the place. And I couldn't put my finger on why. What I didn't know then, but I do know now, is that standing at the top of Signal Station track, I was looking at the very place that the Ventnor went down, and at the very place that so many Chinese settlers found their final resting place. So I come to part 2 of my kōrero, and I want to delve now into just some certain aspects of the SS Ventnor history. A word about our part in the Chinese diaspora. First of all, immigration to New Zealand from China began in about the mid-19th century with the first recorded Chinese immigrant arriving in Nelson in 1842. And then there were more significant numbers in the mid-1860s. These people were mainly gold miners coming to seek their fortune in Aotearoa, or New Gold Mountain as the Chinese knew it. These early immigrants generally came from the south of China, from the Guangdong province, and they mostly lived in the South Island, particularly, of course, in Otago. They were almost exclusively men who would come over from their villages to work here and send money home to their wives and their families. The Chinese Immigration Act of 1881 imposed a £10 poll tax, and later this was raised to £100 in 1896. Now, I understand that is about the equivalent of a year's wages for a labourer at the time. So, restrictions also limited Chinese immigration to one person per 200 tonnes of cargoes, severely curbing arrivals, but despite that, Chinese communities formed and they often worked in laundries, fruit shops and indeed market gardens. Around the time when Chinese people were beginning to come to Aotearoa, it was part of their worldview that they needed to be buried in their ancestral village. There, they could be looked after by members of their family for the years to come, including being honoured with offerings from the living. And it was the worldview of these people that their spirits, the spirits of those who were unable to be buried in their ancestral village, would become hungry ghosts. Their souls wouldn't be at rest until they could return home. Now, because of this, the Chinese community in New Zealand was eager to ensure that those who unfortunately passed away here in New Zealand were able to find a way to lie with their ancestors in their homeland. What happened then was a remarkable feat of community organisation and cooperation and generosity. In the late 1870s, leaders of the Chinese community formed an organisation called Chongsing Tong, or there's various translations, the Flourishing Virtue Society or the Effulgent Goodness Board. Its purpose was to arrange the disinterment of the remains of Chinese immigrants and their return for reburial in their homeland. Reburial societies such as this had formed across the world throughout the Chinese diaspora. So we see the Chinese community at the time come together, very firstly, of course, to fundraise for the necessary funds to organise and execute that reburial journey. In 1883, the Chongsing Tong Society successfully returned the bones of 230 men to Hong Kong aboard the steamer Hoi Ho. In 6 years later, the society then decided to arrange a second voyage with over twice the number of kōiwi or remains. Chongsing Tong chartered the SS Ventnor to transport the remains of 489 Chinese immigrants back home for burial. This was a major operation. For every disinterment, local councils had to be engaged and exercise powers of central government as well. Disinterments were organised right throughout the country where Chinese men had been buried. And local tinsmiths were then also engaged to craft receptacles for the remains, and elders of the Chinese community also prepared to accompany these people home. In Wellington, a local Jiangxing County community also arranged for the remains of 10 men from the Jiangxing County in China to travel on the SS Ventnor also. And this included the remains of my great-great-grandfather, Ng Jor Ching. The kōiwi of those 10 men travelled aboard the deck of the ship, and the others travelled on specially constructed shelves below deck. Now, as many of you will have read downstairs, on the 26th of October 1902, the SS Ventnor departed Wellington, bound for southern China with the remains now of 499 men on board and 9 elderly Chinese men to accompany them. There was a crew of 31, all of whom were foreign and unfamiliar with New Zealand waters. So sometime after midnight on 27 October 1902, the ship hit a rock near Taranaki. The captain then sailed for Auckland, hoping to reach the dry dock in Devonport up there, where repairs could be seen to. Tragically, though, that journey was too far, and the ship went down off the Hokianga coast about 9 p.m. On the 28th of October 1902. 2 lifeboats did make it ashore with news of the shipwreck, with some of the crew and 4 of the elderly Chinese attendants. This, of course, caused monumental distress amongst the Chinese community. The remains, of course, of 499 men were now lost at sea, as were several elders who were accompanying those remains on their journey back home. The Chongsing Tong Society did charter a ship to search for the wreck and managed to rescue people from a 3rd lifeboat, but nothing else was found. 13 people were lost that day, including the captain of the ship and 5 of the 9 elderly attendants. Subsequently, the wreck has been located. It is 15 kilometres southwest of the opening of the Hokianga harbour. And we know that many of the kōiwi remain on board in the depths of the ocean. The site of the wreck and the 500-metre radius around it were in 2014 declared a post-1900 archaeological site, just like the Ng Brothers Chinese Market Garden settlement. So the site is now protected by law, and for the descendants, to us it is a sacred grave site. We are very grateful to the New Zealand Chinese Association and Heritage New Zealand Poheri Taonga for their support in safeguarding that final physical resting place. But here, in my view, remains the most remarkable part of the SS Ventnor story. I'll take you back now to the turn of the century. The ship tragically went down. But what began happening is that the kōiwi started to wash ashore along the coastline north and south of the Hokianga heads. This included the coastlines on Te Roroa and Te Rarawa lands. The people living across those coastlines collected the remains and treated them as if they were the remains of their own ancestors and buried them alongside their tipuna in their urupa. Some of the Hokianga then made significant efforts to return the bones to the families. There were attempts to take the bones to Auckland in the hope they'd have a better chance of getting back to China from there, but the ship chartered for that purpose refused to take human remains. Mokopuna were told not to forget about those Chinese bones, and local iwi continued to tell that story, hoping that the families would one day return. And that eventually was set in motion in 2007 when a particular set of circumstances came into alignment for us. For the third part of my kōrero, I want to turn to the connections formed now in the modern era. In 2007, as I say, the story of the Chinese bones finally found its way to the right people who were perfectly placed to activate engagement with the wider community. Lu Xiong Wong, who has been instrumental in creating connections with the descendants and of the Chinese community that we now have with Te Roroa and Te Rarawa. She was living in Hokianga in Rawene at the time, making a film in the area, and that was in 2007. The story came to her via a Te Roroa kaumātua, and it just so happened that she and Pōneke-based writer and editor Kirsten Wong had just been involved in community consultation regarding the Chinese poll tax. Together, they were then able to activate consultation with the right people in the Chinese community and then start the process of building relationships with the key people in the relevant iwi, including Alex Nathan, the chair of the Trust Board of Te Roroa. Those people, of course, were descended from those who initially discovered the bones, and they had reburied them and then ensured that the word of those bones was passed from generation to generation while they waited for the families to return. So it is over a century later, after the SS Ventnor went down, that the link was finally established between New Zealand Chinese descendants, the kōiwi, and the iwi up north. And that is when a very, very beautiful relationship began. In 2013, and this again is just up on the screen for you right now, I think, 2 of the 3 SS Ventnor memorials were erected. Both involved plaques gifted to Te Roroa and Te Rarawa by Chinese descendants. Te Roroa's plaque was mounted in stone in the Waipawa forest in an area referred to now as the Ventnor Grove. And the plaque given to Te Rarawa hapu, Te Tai Maui and Te Hokokeha was placed at the top of a stunning red gate or wāhāroa built by Nick Grace of Te Rarawa, and you will have seen that flash across the screen a couple times now. It stands, there we go, it stands overlooking Miti Miti Beach on the Maunga Hione Urupa, and it was a gift to the Chinese descendants from Mā Tihe Tihe Marae. Nick Grace explained that the whānau is a sign or a tohu placed there to call people back. The third memorial is outside the Manea Footprints of Kupe Centre in Opononi. This significant memorial was built by the New Zealand Chinese Association. It was designed by TT Architecture, Richard Tam and Robert Say of New Zealand Chinese descent. They are architects based in New York and Auckland, and the site was blessed back in May 2020. It had then its official Chinese blessing on the 10th of April 2021. My first visit, and this photo is from that time, my first visit to those burial sites was timed with this opening, which coincided with the Qingming Festival, or Tomb Sweeping Day. Now that's a traditional Chinese holiday on which many Chinese tend to the graves of their ancestors. The opening was special for a number of reasons. Number one, the descendants read aloud the full list of names of those who were lost. Secondly, a white lion dance took place in front of that memorial to honour the ancestors. And the lion costume was burned afterwards to release its spirit as per tradition. We understand that that is the first time that a burning white lion dance had taken place in New Zealand. And finally, the New Zealand Chinese Association, on behalf of all the descendants, was gifted a po whenua, or carved wooden post, by local kaumātua. It was named Paruru, or place of shelter. And that po symbolically represents the descendants' place in the Hokianga, and it will be displayed whenever we visit. Over the years, the New Zealand Chinese Association has led numerous other trips to the Hokianga to pay our respects and build whanaungatanga or connections with the iwi up north. For me personally, these trips have represented an opportunity to connect with the cultural practices of my ancestors. I didn't grow up with the ritual of Baijay, or Baisan, which involves the burning of incense in the belief that smoke will rise to send our messages to our ancestors. Each person in that bows 3 times with 3 incense in hand, symbolising heaven, earth and humanity. Baijay rituals also include offerings of food, which is then later shared with the group to bring together the living and the departed. The trips have also offered me the opportunity to connect with members of the Ng clan, and I met many of them for the first time during my trip over Waitangi weekend last year. On that trip, our descendant group also joined with a delegation of about 46 young Chinese New Zealanders. They were on a haerenga that was organised by the New Zealand Chinese Association called Paruru, named for the po whenua gifted to us. And that initiative had a kaupapa of strengthening delegates' identity and connection to Aotearoa, New Zealand. So where to from here? Obviously, this is a remarkable story, but in the final part of my talk, I want to address what this means to me. An immediate theme for me is one of belonging. For me, learning about the SS Ventnor has shifted my perspective on my place in Aotearoa. My family has been here for generations now. I'm kōiwi, but my connection to the land of my ancestors is somewhat tenuous. For a long time, I've identified as a Chinese New Zealander. And that's distinct in my mind from being Chinese, because the story of the immigration of my ancestors to Aotearoa, to me, is just as important as the place they left behind. So the narrative I tell and the narratives that others often assign to me about my identity and around belonging in this whenua can be a little bit complicated. However, the manaakitanga and generosity and care and hospitality in the widest sense shown to the kōiwi by the Hokianga and the Hokianga and to us as descendants has been quite remarkable. The Chinese people faced poll tax and years of race-based legislation that limited their ability to flourish and call this place home. By contrast, though, the remains of our people were cared for and accepted and are now lying at peace on Te Roroa and Te Raroa land, and that speaks volumes. Perhaps it is this connection with tangata whenua that has, and rightly so I suggest, anchored my sense of belonging in this land that I was born. We will be forever grateful to Te Roroa and Te Raroa for the care they have showed and continue to show to the remains of our ancestors. And for us in the Ng'u whānau, because we understand that our ancestors' remains were travelling on the ship's deck and were not sealed in heavy boxes, it's very likely that they were swept up into the water, brought ashore by the ocean's currents, and are now at rest on Te Roroa and Te Raroa land. So for the Ng'u whānau, led by the views of our senior matriarchs, our view is that Ng Jor Ching is at peace in the Hokianga. We no longer believe that his ghost is hungry or that there is any need for him to return to his ancestral village. Because he is home up north in the care of the mana whenua there in that area, and we will be forever grateful to them. E mihi ana kia koutou. The history, though, is not only for the descendants. It is a story for all of the New Zealand Chinese community, and I would argue for all New Zealanders. Increasing awareness of the SS Ventnor story has also represented an opportunity to broaden our perspective on New Zealand history. The voices of minorities have long sat in the background, but the Ventnor story has provided us with a chance to really increase the awareness of the place of Chinese settlers in New Zealand history. We've got a bit of music accompanying this there. It's fine. So there are now a number of school resources, including a school journal and online social sciences resources, which provoke really important thinking about issues of identity. For me, though, I think the most significant aspect of the SS Ventnor story is its meaning for the relationship between tangata whenua and Chinese kōiwi living in New Zealand. In particular, it is a call for us to consider what it means to honour tangata whenua and live our lives as Chinese tangata tiriti, or people who understand, respect and engage with the Māori culture and the Treaty of Waitangi. Now, I'm only at the start of this journey, and by no means do I profess to have all of the answers here, but I strongly believe that the mutual respect and commonality of the SS Ventnor story is a seed or a kākano here. What is striking in all of this is the similarities that are present between te ao Māori and the Chinese culture when it comes to honouring the dead and connecting with our ancestors. It's a really good reminder, I think, for us all of the value in focusing on our similarities rather than our differences. Now, a bit of a story here, as I've said, my most recent trip up to the Hokianga was over Waitangi weekend last year, and it presented the perfect opportunity for me to be at Waitangi on Waitangi for the very first time. There was an overwhelming sense of unity, kotahitanga, love, openness and joyous celebration of identity and culture. But one conversation in particular has stayed with me. I was ordering a coffee, as I do, about to hit the road, and a kaumātua invited me over to his table to talk about my experiences at Waitangi. He asked me to lead the karakia mō te kai once his food arrived, and then we got talking about the fact that I work as an employment lawyer, and almost instantly discovered a mutual connection. He had spoken to a hugely respected wahine toa in the industry at lunch at Waitangi the day before. And she turned out to be a huge mentor of mine. So again, just connections. But I explained to him my SS Ventnor connection and that I'd just been at some of the burial sites and memorials paying my respects. And he repeated the sentiment that had earlier been expressed to me. of the descendants having a place, having belonging in the Hokianga. And then what he said to me was this, that I would be a bridge. Now, what he meant by that was that people like me would act as a bridge towards a more open and positive engagement with te ao Māori by non-Māori. Now, that kaumātua imparted a great deal of trust and responsibility in those few words, and exactly how to take action on that is a huge question. But I sincerely believe that connections such as those that now exist between the descendants of those who found and cared for and passed down the story of the bones, and the descendants of those on the SS Ventnor, and by extension the wider New Zealand Chinese community, are an important bridge or pathway. And it's via this pathway that I suggest we can explore questions such as how can we enhance our race relations? What does it mean to be non-Pākehā tauiwi and tangata tiriti? And how do we journey together in our modern multicultural society with its genesis and the discussions of 1840 and prior years? Somewhat lofty thoughts, but there is a real world, everyday impact here that can't be understated. What do I think that looks like? Well, a few thoughts. There are real and meaningful relationships that have formed through our trips to tend to the memorial sites and pay our respects, and a deepening mutual understanding and respect between the descendants and the wider Chinese community, New Zealand Chinese community engaged in the kaupapa and the Hokianga. Those relationships will continue to extend throughout the generations, and both times I've been up to pay my respects, the ākonga of Te Kura o Mātihetehe have joined us, and youth organisation Rangatahi Ora were a big part of the Pāruru trip. So I want us to strive to seize this opportunity, to strive for and model relationships where the focus is what we have in common, and to approach differences with openness and curiosity, humility and grace, and as seeds for growth and positive change. It's also my hope that greater awareness of the story might allow a third family to make an ancestral connection. At this point, there's only 2 descendant families who have been identified. The Silhoi family were obviously instrumental in chartering the journey, and they, of course, lost a life that day. For us in the Ng whānau, we only found out about our ancestor in 2017. But there were, of course, 499 men on board that ship, or remains on that ship. And I can only hope that another group of ancestors is able to have this gift that the connection has brought us. And lastly, a little bit of a word about some of the creative works, because the SS Ventnor story lives on through a growing number of creative works and initiatives. Some of the first of those were Renee Liang's play The Bone Feeder, which was later adapted into an opera of the same name, with stunning music by one of my favourite composers, Gareth Farr. Current New Zealand Poet Laureate Chris Tsay has written evocative poetry about the SS Ventnor. And out of that Pāruru trip came a project called Ko Wāinga Mokupuna, or Who Are the Descendants? And that resulted in a multimedia group exhibition called Double Burial, created by artist Ng Tsai, which included a waiata written and recorded by Eda Tang, Hokianga Oneone, as well as a panel discussion called Tangata Tiriti, Tangata o Te Kaipuke, People of the Treaty, People of the SS Ventnor. And in that panel, Chinese academics and creatives discussed and reflected on how they related to the SS Ventnor kōrero as a Chinese tangata tiriti. And that happened in about March this year. For me personally, I'm currently working on a song cycle for solo soprano based on my personal experience of the SS Ventnor story. The work's at its very early stages, but it's my reflection on immigrant courage and the aroha and manakitanga shown by tangata whenua, and the new path that our connections could forge. It's my intention that this will weave together English and te reo Māori and Cantonese in the song cycle. So there's a bit of a long journey ahead for me, but more to share in good time. I want to end with a whakatauki, and it's this. Kia whakatōmuri te haere whakamua. That's a proverb that means I walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on my past. And I invite you all to explore the posters displayed downstairs with that thought in mind. How can this history inform our actions as we look into the future? Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Can I stay here? Should we stay? Yeah, okay, cool. Cool.
Kia ora, Hannah. Thank you so much for sharing with us your family story and your own reflections on the Ventnor history and its legacy for many Chinese New Zealanders, but particularly yourself and your own whānau. It's really special for everyone to hear that. We do have some time for questions if anyone in the audience would like to ask Hannah a question.
Kia ora, Hannah, that was so
Kia ora.
interesting. Thank you so much. You answered one of my questions, which was, are the remains, your ancestors, now at rest?
Yes.
And I wanted to ask if, so you said yes, and I'm wondering if there's been any contact with the extended family in China and what their views are. And I just wanted to add, I think you've done a great bridging work today.
Oh, thank you. Tēnā koe. So yes, for our whānau, that's absolutely the view. There were some discussions with the other known descendants across the years, and the New Zealand Chinese Association assisted us with some quite wide consultation around that. So I understand that to be the views of most of us based here in New Zealand. In terms of contact for those who are maybe back in China, my understanding is that that hasn't been a wide consultation. I don't know, Lois, if you've got any more to add to that. I can imagine that some of the consultation has happened through the county organisations, so the Poonwha organisation, Jiangsang, and Siap is actually my dad's side, but there's those connections there with the organisations that I think probably have some sister organisations in China. So potentially there may have been some discussions there, but we don't have contact. We don't know who these people. Well, we know their names. We don't know their connections. A lot of that is because these people were single men without issue. So these people all died here, of course, and so that connection is a little bit severed between them and anyone who's come after, if in fact there is anyone who's come after. But certainly for the New Zealand Chinese, the view is that we're very happy that they are at rest.
It was so wonderful. What a wonderful talk. I'm just wondering if you could share a wee bit more about you or your whānau's reaction when you discovered so recently in 2017. I just love to hear more about what that was really like, that you had this connection to the Ventnor.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, and I hate to speak for someone who's not here, but it is a real part of the story. The discovery of Ng Jor Ching and the fact that he was our ancestor and he was on the manifest for the Ventnor was remarkable, especially because the person who made the discovery had been working with the New Zealand Chinese Association on the project without having known the history, the personal history. So my great uncle Gordon Wu had been so very involved, and he's actually in a lot of the photos you see here that are pre-2017. So he'd been working on the project, giving his time and doing a lot of family research. He's sort of the guy in the family that does all the research and goes through the National Archives, and he put all the pieces together. And it was incredibly emotional for him, and I know subsequently when we were there at the opening of the Opanoni Memorial and he was able to read Ng Jor Ching's name out, it was just a momentous moment for him. So hugely emotional, particularly for him because he'd had all the background. For the rest of us, I think it was it's a really sentimental, meaningful, emotional connection. But we hadn't been as connected to the story as Uncle Gordon had. So for us, it's about, I think, a new discovery in a lot of ways, and particularly last year when a lot of the family hadn't been up before. It's a bit of a curiosity and the start of a real journey for us. So yeah, a bit of a mix there.